The envelope slid across the marble kitchen island and stopped just short of her hand. Calix didn't look at her when he did it. His attention stayed on his phone, thumb moving with the same calm precision he used in boardrooms. Arden stared at the bold lettering on the top page. Divorce. Already drafted, already finalized in his mind. The room felt smaller, like the walls had quietly agreed to keep her still. She hadn't cried yet. Shock held her steady. This was how it ended then. Not with an argument, not with grief, but with paperwork delivered like a routine task. Arden lifted her eyes slowly. You couldn't wait. Her voice came out softer than she expected, steady in a way that surprised even her. Calix finally looked up. His face held no anger, no guilt, just restraint. This is practical, he said. Dragging it out only complicates things. He spoke the way he always did when decisions were already made. She searched his face for hesitation and found none. So, this is it, she said. After everything, Calix nodded once. It's better this way. The certainty in his tone hurt more than the papers ever could. Arden noticed her then. Blair stood just behind Calix, close enough that her hand rested lightly against his arm, familiar in a way that didn't ask permission. The ring caught the light when she shifted, a small, deliberate movement that made its meaning impossible to miss. Arden's breath tightened. You're engaged, she said, not accusing, just stating what was already clear. Blair's expression was polite, composed. It wasn't planned, she replied. But sometimes clarity comes quickly. Calix didn't correct her. He didn't need to. His silence answered everything Arden hadn't asked. Arden swallowed and steadied herself. Your mother is in the hospital, she said quietly, grounding herself in fact. Calix nodded. Which is why this needs to stay simple. The word struck wrong. Simple, she repeated. You asked me to get tested, to give up a kidney. He met her gaze without flinching. And you agreed. There was no warmth in it, only expectation. Arden felt the weight of it then, the way care had become currency. Medical consent was meant to be informed, voluntary. Yet here it was, folded into divorce papers, presented as obligation rather than choice. Arden looked at the envelope again, then at him.
You didn't even ask how I felt.
Feelings don't change outcomes.
You didn't even ask how I felt, she said. Calix exhaled once. Feelings don't change outcomes. The sentence settled heavily between them. She thought about how easily consent can be distorted when love is involved, how sacrifice is praised until it becomes expected. Saying yes should never erase the right to dignity. She had agreed to testing because she believed in loyalty, not because she owed her body as proof of it. Yet here she was, learning how quickly devotion can be redefined as entitlement. The realization arrived without drama. He was ending their marriage, while still expecting her body to remain available. Care and rejection were being delivered in the same breath. Arden felt the contradiction settle deep, heavy but clarifying. Organ donation is meant to be an act of free will, grounded in trust and transparency. What stood before her now was neither. You're letting me go, she said. But you still need me. Calix didn't deny it. In that silence, she understood the danger of loving someone who separates gratitude from responsibility. Arden wondered when sacrifice stops being love and starts becoming expectation. How many people stay loyal long after respect has left, convincing themselves endurance is proof of worth? She thought of how often kindness is mistaken for weakness, how easily devotion is used as leverage. If she walked away, she would be called selfish. If she stayed, she would disappear. This wasn't only about her marriage anymore. It was about the quiet pressure placed on people, especially partners, to give more, to accept less, and to remain grateful while being reduced. Arden straightened, feeling the weight of the moment settle into something steady. Saving a life is powerful. So is walking away from a person who believes your value ends at your usefulness. The question wasn't whether she could give up a kidney. It was whether she would continue giving herself to someone who had already decided she was replaceable. And that question lingered, unanswered, pressing forward into everything that would follow. Before we go further, Subscribe if you believe kindness should never be exploited. Arden stayed standing after Calix left the kitchen, her fingers resting on the cold edge of the island. The quiet pressed in, and with it came memories she hadn't invited. They arrived gently, the way truth often does when resistance is gone. There had been a time when this kitchen held warmth. When Calix came home early just to eat with her, jacket draped over a chair, phone forgotten in another room. "Tell me about your day," he used to say, pulling out a chair. She would talk. He would listen. Or at least, he looked like he was listening. That version of them faded slowly. Not with fights, but with absence. Missed dinners became normal. Board meeting ran late, he would say, already scrolling. Arden learned to reheat food quietly. Once, she asked, "Should I wait up?" Calix answered without looking at her, "Don't plan your evenings around me." He said it gently, like advice. She took it as consideration. She adjusted without complaint. Cancelled plans. Ate alone. Learned which conversations were worth saving for later and which were better kept inside. When she did speak, Calix often replied with efficiency instead of curiosity. "I'll handle it. We'll discuss it another time." Another time rarely came. Arden told herself this was adulthood. Partnership meant patience. Love meant understanding pressure. She believed shrinking her needs was the same as being supportive, not realizing how quietly that belief was teaching her to disappear. Arden never introduced herself as part of Calix's success, but she was there in the margins of every win. Late nights found her at the dining table with spreadsheets spread open, reviewing figures he asked her to check because he trusted her eye. "Just tell me if something looks off," he'd say, loosening his tie. She always did. Quietly, accurately. When deals closed, Calix celebrated with his team. Arden washed the glasses afterward. "You should come to the gala," he once told her, distracted. "It's mostly donors and executives." "I'll stay home," she replied. "You'll be busy." He smiled, relieved. "I knew you'd understand." Understanding became her role. She proofread speeches he delivered as if they had appeared fully formed in his mind. She remembered names of people he forgot. When investors called after hours, Arden took messages, softened their impatience, protected his image without being asked. "You're incredible," he said once, half laughing. "I don't know how you manage all this." She waited for him to ask how she was managing. He didn't. Success hardened him in small ways. Gratitude turned into assumption. Support became expected. "You're better at this than I am," he'd say, passing tasks her way. She told herself contribution mattered more than recognition. Love, she believed, was teamwork without scorekeeping. What she didn't see yet was how imbalance grows when one person gives and the other only receives. Emotional labor, like financial investment, needs acknowledgement to remain healthy. Without it, effort turns invisible, and invisibility slowly convinces a person they were never essential at all. Dinner became a formality, Arden prepared out of habit rather than hope. She set 2 plates even when she knew one would go untouched. Some nights, Calix texted that he'd be late. Other nights, he didn't text at all. When he finally came in, the food was cold and her questions stayed unasked. "Long day," he'd say, already loosening his cufflinks. She learned to answer with a nod. One evening, she tried again. "We haven't eaten together in weeks." Calix paused, considering. "That's not intentional," he said. "Things are just busy right now." "They've been busy for a long time," Arden replied. He sighed, not in anger, but impatience. "Do you want me distracted at dinner or focused at work?" She hesitated. "I want you present." "I am present," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Just not in the way you're asking." Conversations shortened. He spoke in summaries, not stories. Decisions were announced, not discussed. When she shared something personal, he offered solutions instead of listening. "You're overthinking," became a common refrain. Arden stopped pushing. She told herself that closeness changes over time, that passion matures into quiet reliability. Yet distance, when unspoken, doesn't settle. it widens. Emotional absence teaches partners to lower expectations rather than raise concerns. Arden didn't notice when she stopped initiating conversation, only that silence felt easier than correction. She filled the space with understanding, unaware that accommodation without reciprocity teaches one person comfort and the other erasure. Judith never raised her voice with Arden. She didn't need to. Disapproval came wrapped in civility. "You look tired," she'd say during Sunday visits, eyes already drifting past her. "Are you managing the house well enough?" Arden always answered politely, "Yes." Calix rarely noticed the exchange. Once, over tea, Judith leaned closer. "Calix needs stability," she said. "He's carrying a great deal. Try not to distract him with unnecessary concerns." Arden smiled, though her chest tightened. "I only want to support him." Judith nodded, satisfied. Good wives understand when to step back. At family gatherings, Judith praised Calix publicly and addressed Arden privately. "You're fortunate," she'd remind her. "Not many women are given this kind of life." Arden thanked her each time, unsure why gratitude felt required. When Arden mentioned returning to work, Judith's expression cooled. "That won't be necessary," she said. "Calix needs a home that runs smoothly." Calix never contradicted his mother. When Arden later asked, "Do you think I'm doing enough?" he replied distracted, "She just wants what's best for us." Arden learned then how silence can be endorsement. Judith's expectations quietly narrowed Arden's world, and Calix's compliance made it permanent. Control doesn't always arrive as force. Sometimes it enters through guidance that discourages independence while calling it care. When authority figures define worth by usefulness, it becomes easy to mistake limitation for loyalty. Arden accepted the frame she was given, not realizing how completely it had been drawn without her consent. Blair entered their lives the way solutions often do, introduced as temporary. "She's efficient," Calix said one evening, shrugging off his jacket, "just helping streamline a few things." Arden nodded, welcoming the relief. Blair moved easily through spaces Arden had learned to navigate carefully. She asked direct questions. She made decisions quickly. "I'll handle that," she'd say, already typing. At first, Arden felt grateful. "Thank you for stepping in," she told her once. "Of course," Blair replied with a pleasant smile. "It's important. Calix stays focused." Focused became the reason for everything. Blair joined meetings Arden once attended from the sidelines. She started answering emails Arden used to draft. When Arden mentioned a preference, Blair responded politely. Calix already approved another approach. Calix didn't correct her. He rarely noticed the shift. "You're good at this," Arden said one night, trying to place the feeling in her chest. Blair smiled. "I just do what needs to be done." That sentence stayed with Arden. Needs, she realized, were being defined without her. Blair's presence wasn't aggressive. It was seamless. Helpfulness, when paired with access, can slowly replace intimacy. No one announced the transition. It happened through convenience. Arden told herself not to be threatened. Support wasn't competition. Still, she noticed how easily Blair occupied roles Arden had once filled without title or recognition. When usefulness becomes the main measure of value, relationships shift quietly. What begins as assistance can become substitution when boundaries aren't clearly protected. Arden noticed the changes, but translated them into reasons she could live with. Calix was under pressure. Judith had expectations. Blair was temporary. She repeated these explanations until they felt like truth. When Calix forgot anniversaries, she reminded herself that consistency mattered more than dates. When he spoke over her, she told herself he was decisive, not dismissive. Love, she believed, didn't need constant reassurance to be real. One evening, she asked softly, "Do you still need me?" Calix looked up, surprised. "Of course," he said. "You know I do." She didn't ask in what way. Arden learned to measure her worth by how smoothly things ran. If Calix wasn't stressed, she was doing her job well. If the house was calm, she had succeeded. She stopped asking what she wanted because wanting felt disruptive. Giving felt safer. She mistook endurance for strength and silence for harmony. What she didn't yet understand was that healthy relationships expand both people. They don't require one person to shrink so the other can stand taller. When love is defined only by accommodation, identity erodes quietly. Arden wasn't losing herself all at once. She was setting pieces aside, believing she could collect them later, unaware of how much had already been left behind. The request came the morning after Arden stopped setting 2 plates at dinner. Calix stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, posture stiff in a way she recognized as controlled urgency. "Yes," he said. "We'll be there." He ended the call and turned to her. "My mother's doctor wants a consultation." "Today?" Arden nodded. "I'll come with you." Calix hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. "It's mostly procedural," he said. "They want to discuss options." "Options for her," Arden replied. "Yes," he said. "For her." The hospital waiting area was quiet, the kind of quiet that forces people to lower their voices even when no one asks. Judith sat upright, hands folded neatly in her lap. "You're late," she said, eyes moving past Arden to her son. "We came as soon as we could," Calix replied. Judith nodded. "Good." Dr. Okari greeted them with practiced calm. "This will be a straightforward discussion," he said, motioning them toward his office. "We'll talk through next steps." Inside, Arden listened as words like compatibility, timelines, and preparation were exchanged. No one looked at her directly. She noticed that. The conversation moved around her, not through her. When the doctor mentioned family donors, Judith's gaze finally landed on Arden, steady and assessing. "We'll need cooperation," Judith said. It wasn't a question. Arden felt the weight of it settle in her chest. Medical decisions are meant to involve consent, clarity, and choice. Yet here, expectation arrived before explanation. She understood then that this meeting wasn't just about health. It was a measure of who would be asked to give and who would be thanked for receiving. The doctor paused, fingers resting lightly on his tablet. "In cases like this," he said, "we usually begin by identifying potential donors within the family." His eyes moved to Calix, then briefly to Judith. He hadn't said Arden's name. Arden felt the familiar pull to wait, to be invited into relevance. Instead, she spoke. "I can be tested." The words came out calmly, without urgency. The room shifted. Calix turned to her, surprised. "Arden." "I want to," she said, meeting his gaze. "If I'm able, I want to help." Judith studied her, expression unreadable. "Of course you would," she said. "That's expected." The doctor nodded. "We'll need blood work and preliminary screening." "I understand," Arden replied. Calix cleared his throat. "You don't have to decide this right now." "I already have," Arden said gently. She wasn't proving anything. She wasn't bargaining. She was making a choice rooted in who she believed herself to be. Offering before being asked felt honest, not pressured. Still, she noticed how quickly the room accepted her decision, how easily willingness became assumption. Later, as they walked down the corridor, Calix said quietly, "You didn't have to volunteer so fast." "I know," she replied. He nodded, relieved more than concerned. Consent in medicine is meant to be informed and uncoerced. Yet emotional context shapes decisions more than people admit. Arden understood the risk, but she also understood her values. The difference she didn't yet realize was that values should be honored, not taken for granted. They stopped near the elevators. Calix didn't touch her, but his voice softened in a way she recognized as final. "I appreciate that," he said. "Not thank you. Appreciate." As if she had agreed to take on extra work, not undergo a medical process with lasting consequences. Arden looked at him. "You don't have to say anything else," she replied. "I mean it," he said. "This helps." Helps. The word landed plainly. He checked his phone, already drafting messages, already moving forward. She watched the shift happen in real time, the problem addressed, the solution secured. Her role completed. I'll coordinate with the doctor's office, he added. They'll send you instructions. That was it. No questions about fear. No discussion of recovery. No acknowledgement that her body, not his schedule, would bear the cost. Arden nodded. Okay. Later, in the car, she tried once more. Did it worry you?
Did it ever worry you that I might say no?
I knew you wouldn't.
Did it ever worry you that I might say no?
I knew you wouldn't.
Did it worry you? He frowned, confused. Worry me how? That I might say no. Calix considered it. I knew you wouldn't. The certainty unsettled her. Gratitude that assumes compliance loses its meaning. It turns generosity into a resource to be managed. Arden understood then that appreciation without empathy is simply relief disguised as courtesy. Medical decisions affect identity, autonomy, and long-term health. When those impacts are minimized, it becomes easier for others to benefit without reckoning with the weight of what is being given. Arden rested her hands in her lap and watched the road pass by, steadying herself. She had offered freely. What followed would reveal whether that freedom would be respected or quietly absorbed. Judith didn't wait until they reached the car. You did the right thing, she said, adjusting her coat as if the matter were settled. There was no softness in her tone, no relief, just confirmation. Family steps in when it's required. Arden nodded out of habit. I wanted to help. Judith glanced at her. Wanting isn't the point. Responsibility is. The word stayed with Arden as they drove. Responsibility, not gratitude, not care. Later that evening, Judith called. The doctor's office will need your availability, she said. Be flexible. This can't be delayed. I'll make time, Arden replied. I assumed you would, Judith said, and ended the call. Calix overheard part of it. She's just anxious, he said. Try not to take it personally. Arden looked at him. Did it ever occur to you that she didn't thank me? He shrugged lightly. She's worried about her health. Arden let the subject drop. She understood worry. What unsettled her was the absence of acknowledgement, as if her willingness were a given rather than a gift. In healthcare, family support can be life-saving, but ethical practice requires respect for autonomy. Expectation can blur that line, turning consent into duty. That night, Arden lay awake, thinking about how often women are praised for sacrifice while being denied appreciation. When giving is treated as obligation, it becomes easier for others to forget the person behind the action. She wondered if anyone would ask how she was feeling, or if the answer had already been decided for her. Arden moved through the next few days with measured calm. She answered emails, returned calls, and confirmed appointments without letting her voice change. When Calix asked, "You're okay, right?" she replied, "I'm fine." It was easier than explaining the tightness that settled in her chest at night. Alone, fear arrived uninvited. She read about recovery times, about fatigue, about how the body adjusts. She closed the pages quickly, steadying her breath before panic could take shape. In public, she stayed composed. At dinner with Judith, she smiled and listened. "The tests will be routine," Judith said. "You'll manage." "I will," Arden replied. Later, in the hallway, Calix lowered his voice. "You don't need to worry," he said. "I'm not," she answered, and meant that she wouldn't burden him with it. The contrast surprised her. How calm can be learned behavior. Fear doesn't always look dramatic. Often it sits quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. Arden had learned that expressing uncertainty invited dismissal, so she kept it private. She practiced control because it kept the peace. In healthcare, emotional readiness matters as much as physical compatibility. Support systems are meant to include space for fear, questions, and consent without pressure. Arden knew this in theory. Living it was harder. She chose composure, not because she lacked concern, but because she believed steadiness was expected. The cost of that belief would come later. For now, she held herself together, hoping that courage could be enough to carry her through what came next. The blood draw was scheduled early. Arden arrived alone, signing forms that explained risks in careful language. She read every line. Consent, she knew, wasn't a moment, it was a process. A nurse smiled and asked, "First time?" "Yes," Arden said. "You're doing something generous," the nurse replied, tying the band gently. Arden nodded, unsure whether generosity should feel this quiet. She walked the corridors afterward, shoes echoing softly, watching families pass in pairs. In one waiting area, Calix joined her briefly. "How did it go?" "Quick," she said. "Good," he replied, already checking the time. "They'll call with results." Judith appeared later. Posture firm. "You did what was needed," she said. Arden heard no relief, only closure. When they parted, Arden remained seated, hands folded, breathing evenly. Hope arrived cautiously, not about praise or repair, but about doing something that still felt aligned with who she was. Pausing there, she wondered how many people give pieces of themselves to relationships that no longer see them. Pause for a second. Would you give up an organ for someone who barely sees you? Comment yes or never. Medical decisions carry ethical weight, autonomy, informed consent, and emotional support must travel together. Without them, generosity risks becoming self-erasure. Arden rose and left the hospital with that thought steadying her steps, carrying a quiet hope that choosing compassion didn't have to mean losing herself. The call came 2 days later. Arden was folding laundry when Calix said her name from the doorway. His voice was level, prepared. "The doctor called," he said. "We got your results." She looked up, and he walked in slowly, stopping a few steps away, as if distance were intentional. "You're not compatible." The words landed too neatly. Arden blinked. "Not compatible how?" "Medically," he replied. "It happens." She waited for more, for numbers, explanations, concern, but Calix had already moved on. "It's better this way," he added. "No risks for you." Something tightened in her chest. She thought of the nurse's careful phrasing, the forms she'd signed, the blood vials labeled with her name. "Did the doctor explain why?" she asked. Calix shook his head. "There's no need. The conclusion is clear." Clear. The word felt rehearsed. Arden studied his face, searching for discomfort, regret, anything that suggested surprise. She found none. "So that's it?" she said. "Yes," he answered. "We'll explore other options." Relief should have followed. Instead, unease crept in. Medical results are rarely delivered without detail, especially when someone has already been cleared for testing. Arden had learned enough to know that incompatibility is specific, not vague. Yet Calix spoke as if reading a summary prepared in advance. She nodded slowly. "I understand." Inside, she didn't. But she also knew how easily doubt is dismissed when it inconveniences someone else. So she folded the towel carefully, set it aside, and let the silence stretch, already sensing that this answer was designed to end questions, not satisfy them. Calix remained by the door, hands relaxed at his sides, posture almost casual. "I didn't want you to worry," he said. "These things can sound alarming if you don't have context." "I'm not worried," Arden replied. "I'm confused." He nodded, as if he had expected that. The doctor was very clear. "This outcome spares you unnecessary procedures." His tone was smooth, confident, the same one he used when closing deals. Arden noticed how carefully his words were chosen, how little room they left for follow-up. "Did you speak to the doctor directly?" she asked. "Yes." "When?" "This morning." She watched him answer without hesitation. No pauses, no recalculations. It sounded prepared, as if he had practiced saying it aloud before delivering it to her. "So I don't need to go back?" she asked. "No," he said. "There's nothing more for you to do." That was when Arden felt it, a subtle shift, the sense that her involvement had ended too cleanly. Medical processes are rarely abrupt. There are calls, clarifications, follow-ups. Yet Calix spoke as if the matter had already been filed away. "You seem certain," she said. "I am," he replied. "This closes the door." The phrase echoed. Closed the door. Arden nodded again, keeping her face still. She had learned that reacting too quickly invited dismissal. Calm preserved credibility. Trust depends on transparency. When information is filtered through someone else's reassurance, it becomes harder to separate care from control. Arden didn't accuse him. She didn't argue. She simply listened, storing the feeling that something essential had been withheld, even as the explanation sounded complete. After Calix left the room, Arden remained seated, hands resting in her lap longer than necessary. The house felt unchanged, yet something within it had shifted. She replayed the conversation, not for what was said, but for what hadn't been. No paperwork, no follow-up appointment, no mention of next steps from the clinic. When she had gone in for blood work, the nurse had explained that results usually came with a review. This hadn't. That evening, Arden called the clinic herself and reached voicemail. She hung up before leaving a message, unsettled by the impulse. She wasn't accusing anyone. She just wanted clarity. Still, the need for it surprised her. Trust, she realized, shouldn't require this much effort. At dinner, she asked lightly, "Did they mention anything about retesting?" Calix looked up. "Why would they? I thought sometimes they confirm," she said. "They don't," he replied, ending the subject. His certainty felt heavy. Arden noticed how questions now carried consequences. Each one tightened the space between them. So she stopped asking. She told herself to accept the answer she'd been given. Yet, unease has a way of staying present, even when ignored. It sat quietly beside her, patient. She remembered the consent forms again, the emphasis on patient communication, the assurance that results would be discussed openly. Medical ethics rely on shared understanding. When that understanding is mediated by someone else, doubts naturally follow. Arden washed the dishes and dried them carefully, aligning each plate. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't suspicious enough to confront him. But she felt it then, a sense that the truth had been shortened for convenience, and that her role in it had ended the moment it became inconvenient to explain more. Blair arrived the next afternoon with the ease of someone who felt welcome. "I heard about the results," she said softly, placing her bag down. "I'm really sorry." Her voice carried concern, measured and gentle. Arden studied her face, noting how sympathy can be rehearsed the same way professionalism is. "It's fine," Arden replied. "These things happen." Blair nodded. "Exactly. At least now there's clarity. Clarity again." The word appeared wherever questions might have lived. Blair moved closer, lowering her voice. "Calix was worried about you," she added. "He didn't want you going through unnecessary stress." Arden met her eyes. "Did he say that?" "Yes," Blair answered quickly. "He said it was better to protect you." Protect. Arden felt the phrase settle strangely. Protection usually involves honesty, not omission. Blair's hand hovered for a moment, then rested briefly on Arden's arm. "You did everything right," she said. "You should be proud." Pride felt misplaced. Arden didn't respond. Blair filled the silence smoothly. "Now you can focus on yourself," she said. "Let the doctors handle the rest." Later, Arden realized how effective sympathy can be when it discourages inquiry. Blair hadn't dismissed her. She'd closed the subject with kindness. Care, when paired with finality, can become a barrier rather than support. In health matters, reassurance should never replace transparency. Well-meaning words lose value if they redirect away from facts. Arden sensed that Blair's concern was designed to comfort her into stillness, not empower her to understand. She thanked her politely, even as the quiet certainty grew stronger. Empathy without openness leaves too many questions untouched. Calix brought it up that evening as if it were a logistical update. "Since the donor situation is resolved," he said, "we should finalize things between us." He placed the folder on the table, careful not to slide it this time. "It's cleaner if we don't delay." Arden didn't open it. "Cleaner for who?" "For both of us," he replied evenly. No confusion, no mixed expectations. She looked at the folder, then back at him. "You're saying this now?" "Yes," he said. "Timing matters." Blair stood near the doorway, listening without intruding. "This doesn't have to be painful," she added gently. "Clear boundaries help everyone move forward." Arden let out a slow breath. "You're explaining urgency like efficiency," she said. "Not like a marriage ending." Calix's expression didn't change. "Dragging it out only creates problems. We're being adults." Adults. The word felt like a shield. Arden noticed how decisiveness was framed as maturity, how speed was presented as kindness. Yet endings, like medical decisions, deserve space for understanding. Rushing consent, whether for surgery or separation, limits agency. "So, this is about order," Arden said quietly. "Yes," Calix answered. "About closure." Closure arrived without conversation, without grief acknowledged. The folder stayed closed. Arden sat still, absorbing how neatly he had organized her out of his life. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply registered how easily care can be replaced with procedure when empathy is treated as an obstacle. Healthy transitions require informed choice and time to process. When urgency replaces dialogue, it benefits the person least affected by the outcome. Arden felt that truth settle, heavy and clarifying, as the room returned to silence. Arden remained composed after they left her alone with the folder. She sat at the table long after the house quieted, tracing the edge of the paper without opening it. Shock didn't arrive as noise. It settled slowly, like weight. She thought of the blood draw, the consent forms, the careful trust she had placed in a process that was now being used to justify her removal. When Calix returned briefly to collect his keys, she looked up. "You didn't even ask if I wanted to see the report," she said. "There's nothing to see," he replied. "Then why does this feel unfinished?" He paused, then said, "Because endings always do." She nodded, accepting the answer without believing it. After he left, Arden stood and walked to the window, steadying herself against the glass. She didn't cry. She didn't break. Devastation doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly, rearranging what a person believes about love and honesty. In healthcare and in relationships, informed participation matters. Being excluded from information that affects your body or your life erodes trust faster than conflict ever could. Arden understood now that something had been taken from her, first clarity, then choice. She gathered the folder and placed it neatly in a drawer. She wasn't ready to read it yet, but she was ready to remember this moment, the calm she had been forced to maintain, because silence, she realized, is often mistaken for acceptance. And she had not accepted anything. She had only begun to understand how deeply she had been misled. The conference room felt too small for the people inside it. Arden sat nearest the end of the table, the folder Calix had given her still unopened in her bag. Blair stood beside him, composed, hands folded. Judith occupied the seat at the head, posture rigid, eyes sharp with expectation rather than concern. No one spoke. The quiet pressed in, thick with unfinished truths. The door opened without ceremony. Dr. Okery stepped in, tablet tucked under his arm, expression professional but alert. "Thank you for waiting," he said, closing the door behind him. "I wanted us all present before we reviewed anything further." Calix nodded. "We've already discussed the results," he said smoothly. "Arden isn't compatible." Dr. Okery paused. Just a fraction, long enough to matter. He glanced down at his tablet, then back up. "That's not accurate," he said.
That's not accurate. Mrs. Whitmore's test results indicate strong compatibility. Very strong, in fact.
Strong?
"Not accurate," he said. The room shifted. Blair blinked. "I'm sorry." Judith straightened. "Doctor." Arden felt her breath catch, though her face remained still. Dr. Okery walked closer to the table and set the tablet down. "Mrs. Whitmore's test results indicate strong compatibility," he said evenly. "Very strong, in fact." Calix's jaw tightened. "That can't be right," he said. "You told me I haven't spoken to you about her results," Dr. Okery replied. "Not yet." Silence followed, not confusion, recognition. Arden felt it first, the sensation that the missing pieces had finally entered the room. "You said I wasn't compatible," she said quietly, turning to Calix. He didn't answer. Judith's voice sharpened. Doctor, are you saying there's been a mistake? I'm saying the information shared with Mrs. Whitmore does not match what's in her file, Dr. Okari replied. Medical records are governed by strict standards. Alterations require documentation, authorization, and transparency. Deviations are not casual. Arden understood that instinctively. She looked at the tablet, then at Calix, and realized the unease she'd carried had finally found its source. This room wasn't about health anymore. It was about truth, arriving late but intact. Calix leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Doctor, there must be a mix-up, he said, voice steady but tight. I was informed she wasn't a match. Doctor, Okari met his gaze. By whom? Calix hesitated. By your office. That's not how results are communicated, Dr. Okari replied. Patients are informed directly or in a joint consultation. There's a record of every disclosure. Blair shifted her weight. So you're saying Arden can donate? Yes, the doctor said. She meets the criteria with a high compatibility score. Judith's fingers curled around the armrest. Then why were we told otherwise? Doctor, Okari tapped the tablet. That's what I need to clarify. Arden felt the room narrow to a single point. You told me it was over, she said to Calix. You said there was nothing more to do. Calix exhaled. I was trying to spare you. Spare me what? She asked. The truth? Dr. Okari continued, measured. There are two versions of Mrs. Whitmore's report in the system. Judith's head snapped up. Two. One initial report confirming compatibility, he said, and a later entry marking her as incompatible. Blair's eyes widened. Later by how long? By several hours, Dr. Okari replied. After the first was finalized, the silence that followed was different. It carried weight. Arden felt it press against her ribs. Medical documentation isn't flexible. Revisions require reason and traceability. Who changed it? She asked. Dr. Okari didn't answer immediately. The access log shows the change was made using administrative credentials. Calix straightened. That proves nothing. It proves access, Dr. Okari said, and intent is determined by investigation. Judith stood. Are you telling me someone altered a medical record? I'm saying the record was altered, the doctor replied calmly. Arden looked at Calix. You said it was clear, she said. You said the door was closed. He didn't meet her eyes. In healthcare, accuracy protects patients from harm. When information is altered, it compromises consent and trust. Arden understood then that the calm she'd been offered wasn't protection. It was containment. The truth hadn't been missing. It had been redirected. Dr. Okari turned the tablet so everyone could see. Mrs. Whitmore's compatibility score is 5 out of 5, he said. Low rejection risk. Excellent prognosis. His voice carried no drama, only fact. She is, medically speaking, an ideal donor. Arden felt the words land with a strange calm. Ideal. The nurse's careful explanations, the smooth blood draw, the absence of complications. Suddenly, they aligned. She hadn't. Imagined the ease. It had been real. So, there was never a question, she said, not accusing, just confirming. There was not, the doctor replied. Calix shook his head once. That's not what I was told. Doctor, Okari looked at him steadily. You were not told by me. Blair's gaze moved between them. You said she wasn't compatible, she said to Calix. You were certain. I acted on the information I had, he replied. From where? Judith demanded. Arden leaned back in her chair, absorbing the shape of it. She wasn't relief-struck or triumphant. She felt something colder, recognition. You ended our marriage based on that, she said quietly. You pushed everything forward. Calix opened his mouth, then closed it. Dr. Okari continued. We typically inform donors directly. Mrs. Whitmore should have been briefed in person. She wasn't, Arden said. Blair's voice softened. So you could have donated, she said, looking at Arden. Yes, Arden answered. I still could. The realization settled unevenly. Arden wasn't just capable. She had been preferred by the data, by the science. And yet, she had been removed. You didn't choose me, she said to Calix. You removed me. Calix looked up. It wasn't about choosing. It was, Arden replied. It always is. Medical compatibility doesn't assign value, but decisions about disclosure do. Arden understood now that the question had never been whether she could help. It was whether her help was wanted without her presence. Being an ideal match and still being excluded taught her something precise. When honesty is inconvenient, even the best option can be discarded. Dr. Okari scrolled slowly, deliberately, as if giving the moment time to settle. This is the original report, he said, tapping the screen. Time-stamped, finalized, no concerns noted. He paused, then swiped. This is the version that followed. Arden leaned forward. The heading was the same. The conclusion was not. Incompatible, Blair read aloud, disbelief edging her voice. That's different. Yes, the doctor said, and it was entered after the original was locked. Judith's face tightened. That shouldn't be possible. It isn't routine, Dr. Okari replied. Any amendment requires justification and leaves a trace. Calix stood. You're implying misconduct. I'm stating process, the doctor answered evenly. The system logs every access. This change was not made by clinical staff. Arden felt something settle into clarity. You told me there was nothing to review, she said to Calix. You said it was finished. He didn't respond. Blair turned to him. You said. The doctor confirmed it. I said the outcome was clear, Calix replied. That's not an answer, she said sharply. Dr. Okari continued. The access log shows the revision was made, using administrative credentials tied to external authorization. He hesitated, then added, the request came through channels associated with Mr. Whitmore. Judith pushed back from the table. You altered her medical record? Calix's voice rose. I didn't change anything myself, but you authorized it, Arden said quietly. The room felt exposed, stripped of polite framing. Medical records exist to protect patients, to ensure decisions are informed and voluntary. Altering them removes agency. Arden understood now why her questions had been redirected, why reassurance had replaced explanation. The truth hadn't been lost. It had been revised to fit a plan that no longer included her consent. Blair stared at the screen again. You made her disappear from the process, she said. Calix swallowed. I was managing a situation. Judith's voice shook. You managed people. When trust in medical information is broken, harm extends beyond health. It reaches identity, autonomy, and dignity. Arden felt the weight of that breach settle fully, not as pain, but as certainty. What had been done to her wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. Blair's attention snapped back to the tablet. You said Arden volunteered first, she said slowly, eyes fixed on Calix. You said there were no other tests before hers. Dr. Okari glanced down again. That's not accurate either, he said. He adjusted the screen, bringing up another file. Miss Sutton's screening was completed 6 weeks prior. The words hung there. Blair's breath caught. 6 weeks? Yes, the doctor replied. Initial blood work and imaging were done as a preliminary option. Blair turned to Calix. You tested me before her. Calix didn't answer immediately. You told me she refused, Blair said, voice tightening. You said she didn't want to help. Arden felt the room tilt, not from shock, but from alignment. I volunteered before anyone asked, she said evenly. I offered without conditions. Blair took a step back. So what was I? She asked. A backup. Calix reached for her arm. She pulled away. Don't, she said. Just don't. Judith's voice cut through, sharp with disbelief. You let her believe she was the first choice. I needed certainty, Calix said. At whose expense? Judith demanded. Blair's eyes filled, not with tears yet, but with clarity. You told me she wouldn't do it, she said. You made me think I was stepping in. I was protecting everyone, Calix replied. You were protecting outcomes, Blair said, not people. Arden watched the realization land in Blair's posture, the way her shoulders squared as understanding replaced hope. Being tested first hadn't made her special. It had made her convenient. You didn't choose either of us, Arden said. You staged us. Medical ethics emphasized transparency to prevent coercion. Testing multiple donors without disclosure removes informed choice from everyone involved. Blair saw that now. So did Judith. Arden felt something unexpected, relief. Not because the truth hurt less, but because it was finally shared. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition, arriving for all of them at once. Judith remained standing, one hand braced against the table as if the room itself had shifted. You tested her, she said slowly, looking at Blair, then erased her. Her gaze moved to Arden. And you erased her too, her voice lowered, controlled but trembling at the edges. All while letting me believe this was a medical limitation. Calix straightened. Mother, I was trying to handle a complicated situation. You handled it, Judith snapped, by deciding who deserved the truth. Arden said nothing. She watched Judith's face change, not into shock but recognition. This wasn't discovery, it was acknowledgement. I defended you, Judith continued, when Arden questioned timing. When she asked for explanations. I told her not to distract you. She turned fully toward him. You used my authority to silence her. Calix opened his mouth. I didn't. You did, Judith said. Every time I spoke for you, you let it stand. Blair folded her arms, holding herself together. You let us both believe we were helping, she said. You let us arrange our lives around a story you controlled. Dr. Okari spoke quietly. Medical decisions require informed consent from all parties. When information is selectively shared, consent becomes compromised. Judith nodded once, sharply. I understand that now. She turned to Arden. You trusted us. Arden met her eyes. I trusted him. The difference mattered. Judith exhaled, long and deliberate. I taught you to manage outcomes, she said to Calix. I did not teach you to manage people this way. Her voice hardened. You didn't just mislead them. You used their willingness against them. Calix's composure finally cracked. I was trying to avoid chaos. You created it, Judith replied. And you hid behind my name while doing it. Silence fell again, heavier this time. In families, authority can blur accountability. When elders are used as shields, harm travels further because it looks sanctioned. Judith saw that clearly now. Arden did too. Manipulation isn't only about lies, it's about who is allowed to speak and who is expected to comply. And in that room the truth had finally reached the one person whose approval Calix had always relied on. Calix exhaled slowly, the sound uneven. I needed options, he said at last. The sentence landed without apology. If something went wrong, I couldn't risk everything on one path. Arden looked at him, steady. So you lied. I planned, he replied. That's what leaders do. Blair shook her head. Leaders don't turn people into contingencies. Judith's voice cut in. Firm. Say it plainly. Calix swallowed. I couldn't afford uncertainty. Arden felt the words settle into place, precise and final. You didn't choose me, she said. You ensured yourself. And you didn't choose me either, Blair added. You positioned me. Calix lifted his hands. I was protecting my mother. Judith stepped closer. By removing consent? I was trying to survive, he said, voice tightening. Survival doesn't require deception, Arden replied. It requires honesty. Dr. Okari spoke softly, anchoring the room. In medicine, options are discussed openly, so all parties can decide freely. When one person controls information, everyone else loses agency. Calix looked at Arden. If I'd told you the truth, you might have walked away. Yes, she said, and that would have been my choice. Blair let out a breath she'd been holding. You made sure none of us could choose. Judith closed her eyes briefly. You learn to manage outcomes, she said. But you forgot people aren't assets. The room held 3 realizations at once. Arden understood she had never been chosen, only counted. Blair understood she had been a reserve, not a partner. Judith understood her silence had enabled it all. Calix stood in the center of it, stripped of justification by the clarity of his own words. Ethical decision-making, whether in families, leadership, or healthcare, demands transparency. Options are meant to empower, not control. When information is withheld to secure compliance, trust collapses. Arden felt the collapse complete itself, not with noise but with certainty. The truth hadn't arrived to destroy her. It arrived to release her from a role she had never agreed to play. Judith didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You're done here," she said, looking directly at Calix. "Leave." Calix stared at her. "Mother, I said leave," she repeated. "You will not sit in this room and justify this any further." Arden watched him hesitate, waiting for the familiar pause where Judith usually softened. It didn't come. Blair stood still, arms folded tightly, eyes fixed on the table. Dr. Oakery stepped back, giving the moment space. "This is a family matter," Calix said carefully. "No," Judith replied. "This is a consequence." She turned toward the door and pressed the call button beside it. "Security," she said. "Please escort my son out of this conference room." Calix's head snapped up. "You're throwing me out?" "You removed consent from everyone in this room," Judith said. "You don't get comfort now." Arden remained seated, hands folded in her lap, breathing steady. She felt no urge to intervene. Power had shifted without noise. Calix glanced at her once, searching for something. Defense, softness, familiarity. She gave him none. When authority finally names harm for what it is, consequences stop being negotiable. Boundaries, especially late ones, are still boundaries, and enforcing them protects everyone who was previously silenced. Security arrived quietly, 2 officers stepping just inside the doorway without urgency. One of them spoke calmly. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us." Calix straightened his jacket, the motion automatic. "This isn't necessary," he said, aiming for control. "It is," Judith replied, not looking at him. "And it's over." As he stood, the room felt different, lighter, as if a pressure had lifted. Blair shifted aside to clear the path. Calix paused near her. "Blair," he said, lowering his voice. She didn't answer. He turned toward Arden. "Please," he said. She met his eyes once, steady and quiet. She didn't speak. Silence was no longer confusion, it was choice. The officers waited. Calix took a step, then another. Each movement looked smaller than the last. At the doorway, he glanced back again. No one followed. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Dr. Oakery exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said to Judith. "That was appropriate. Removing someone from a clinical setting isn't punishment, it's protection. When emotions escalate or trust is broken, boundaries keep decisions ethical and safe." Arden felt grounded by that clarity. The escort wasn't dramatic. It was necessary. And for the first time since the testing began, the space felt honest. Blair remained standing after the door closed, eyes fixed on the place where Calix had been. Slowly she reached for her hand. The ring came off without resistance. She held it for a moment, turning it once, as if weighing something that no longer belonged to her. "I can't do this," she said quietly. Judith looked at her. "You don't have to." "I thought I was helping," Blair continued. "I thought I was stepping in where someone else wouldn't." Arden said nothing. She watched, steady, allowing the moment to belong to Blair. Blair placed the ring on the table between them. "I won't be part of a story that starts with omission," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I won't build a life on information I wasn't allowed to question." Judith nodded once. "That's wise." Blair turned to Arden. "I'm sorry," she said, "for believing what I was told." Arden met her gaze. "Belief isn't the same as intent," she replied. You weren't the one controlling the truth. Blair took a breath and stepped back. Choosing to return the ring wasn't rejection, it was reclamation. In relationships, consent depends on transparency. When commitment is formed under partial information, stepping away isn't failure. It's self-respect. Arden stayed seated as the room rearranged itself around her. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. Voices lowered. No one asked her how she felt, and for once, that felt right. She had spent too long translating her emotions for other people's comfort. Now, she let quiet speak for her. Judith glanced at her. "Arden," she said, gentler than before. Arden met her eyes. "I'm here." Dr. Okari approached with measured care. "If you need a moment, we can pause," he offered. She shook her head once. "Continue." Blair watched her, uncertainty flickering. "You're very calm," she said. Arden considered the words, then replied simply, "I'm finished explaining myself." No one challenged that. The calm wasn't numbness. It was alignment. She had learned that composure doesn't mean absence of feeling. It means presence without performance. When she didn't rush to fill the space, the truth stayed visible. In settings where power has shifted, silence can be an assertion. It says, "I understand what's happening, and I don't need to persuade anyone anymore." Arden's steadiness changed the room. Decisions felt heavier, more careful. Accountability had found a witness who would not be moved by urgency or reassurance. Respecting autonomy includes respecting quiet. Not every response must be spoken to be valid. Arden's silence wasn't retreat, it was consent reclaimed, on her terms. Dr. Okari cleared his throat gently. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," he said. The shift in his tone drew everyone's attention back to the table. Without a donor, the timeline is limited. Judith straightened. "How limited?" He didn't rush the answer. "Weeks," he said. The word landed with precision. Not dramatic. Definitive. Judith closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "And with a transplant?" "There's a strong chance of recovery," Dr. Okari replied. "But timing matters." All eyes turned to Arden. She felt the weight settle. Familiar but clearer now. Life or death no longer rested on obligation or expectation. It rested on choice. She met Judith's gaze, then the doctor's. "I understand," she said. Calix wasn't there to hear it. That mattered. Medical decisions are most ethical when free of pressure. Prognosis isn't a demand, it's information meant to support informed choice. Arden felt the difference now. The room wasn't asking. It was waiting. She stood slowly. "I'll need time," she said. Dr. Okari nodded. Of course. As she left the conference room, Arden understood the power shift completely. The future of everyone involved rested with the person who had been dismissed as expendable. And this time, whatever she chose would be based on truth, not coercion. Arden returned to the hospital 2 days later. Not hurried, not uncertain. Dr. Okari met her outside the same conference room, his expression careful. "Have you made a decision?" he asked. "Yes," Arden replied. "I'm willing to donate." Judith exhaled sharply, relief breaking through restraint. "Thank you," she said, standing. "You're saving my life." Arden didn't sit. "I'm not finished." Judith paused. "What do you mean?" "I'll donate," Arden said evenly, "but not the way you expect." The room settled into attention. Blair wasn't there. Calix hadn't arrived yet. That mattered. Arden wanted the terms spoken before influence entered the space. "My consent depends on conditions," she continued. "Clear ones, written ones." Dr. Okari nodded. "That's appropriate." Judith frowned. "This isn't a negotiation." "It is," Arden replied calmly. "Because my body isn't an obligation." She felt no anger now, only clarity. Medical consent can be withdrawn or structured at any point. Agreeing to donate does not erase the right to boundaries, accountability, or protection from future harm. Arden understood that fully now. Offering help didn't mean surrendering power. It meant choosing how and under what circumstances help would be given. She looked at the empty chair where Calix would soon sit. "He'll need to hear this," she said. Every word. Calix arrived 10 minutes later, breath controlled, face unreadable. He took the seat opposite Arden without greeting her. "You said you'd donate," he began. "I said I'd consider it," Arden replied. "On my terms." She opened her bag and placed a folder on the table. It was thick, heavy with intent. Calix's eyes flicked to it, then back to her. "What is this?" "Protection," Arden said. Dr. Okari remained standing, observant. Judith leaned forward, uneasy. Arden slid the folder across. "These are legal documents," she continued, "prepared by independent counsel, not yours." Calix opened it slowly. "This is excessive." "It's necessary," Arden replied. Verbal assurances failed. The pages outlined conditions in precise language. No ambiguity, no room for reinterpretation. Arden watched Calix read, recognizing the shift in his posture. This wasn't emotion he could manage. It was structure he couldn't bend. "You don't trust me," he said. "No," Arden answered. "I don't rely on trust anymore." Judith's voice softened. "Arden, surely we can talk." "We already did," Arden said gently. "Without honesty, legal clarity protects consent. When power has been misused, written terms restore balance by removing reliance on goodwill alone. Arden hadn't brought these papers to punish. She brought them to ensure that if she gave, it would never again be taken lightly. She folded her hands. "Read everything," she said. "Then we'll talk." Calix stopped reading halfway through the next page. 70%? He said, looking up. "This has to be a mistake." "It isn't," Arden replied. 70% of your personal holdings and controlling interests." Judith inhaled sharply. "Arden, please," Arden said, not raising her voice. "Let him finish." Calix flipped back, scanning figures. "My companies will remain operational," Arden said, "but no longer insulated from accountability. This would dismantle my control," he said. "Yes," she replied. "That's the point." He leaned back, disbelief giving way to calculation. "You're asking me to give up everything I built?" Arden met his gaze. "You built it with information you controlled. Power without transparency creates risk. This corrects that." Judith shook her head. "This is too much." "It's proportional," Arden said, "to what was taken from me. Asset transfers in settlements exist to balance harm when trust is breached. They aren't revenge, they're redistribution of risk." Arden understood that value isn't only financial, it's leverage. By shifting control, she ensured that no future decision would be made by erasing someone else's consent. Calix closed the folder slowly. "If I sign this," he said, "nothing about my life stays the same." "That's true," Arden replied, "but it will finally be honest." Arden turned to the next page and held it there, letting the silence do its work. "There's more," she said. "A public statement." Calix's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "About everything," Arden replied. "The altered record, the misinformation, the way consent was managed." Judith stiffened. "Public?" "Yes," Arden said. "Clear, verifiable. Released within 24 hours of surgery." Calix shook his head. "That would ruin me." "It would correct the record," Arden answered. "Those are different things." He scanned the paragraph. "This requires me to admit fault." "It requires you to tell the truth," she said. "For once, without filters. Public accountability matters when private harm has wider effects. Misinformation in medical contexts undermines trust beyond a single family." Arden wasn't seeking humiliation, she was preventing repetition. "Your words will be reviewed by counsel and the hospital," she added. "No deflection, no omissions." Judith's voice softened. "Arden, please, I need this," Arden said. "So no one else is quieted the way I was." Calix closed his eyes briefly. "If I do this," he said, "there's no going back." "That's what accountability means," Arden replied. "Transparent disclosures restore confidence when systems fail. They signal responsibility, not shame." Arden watched him wrestle with the cost, knowing that truth carries weight only when it's carried publicly. Calix turned the page again, slower this time. "What is this?" he asked. "Audit authorization," Arden replied. "Independent. Full access." His jaw tightened. "To my companies?" "To everything," she said. "Financial records, administrative actions, decision trails." Judith leaned forward. "That's invasive." "It's necessary," Arden answered. "When records are altered once, oversight becomes protection, not punishment." Calix exhaled through his nose. "You're assuming guilt." "I'm preventing repetition," Arden said. "There's a difference." The clause was precise, time-bound, externally managed, non-negotiable. Arden had learned that accountability without verification is symbolic at best. "This ensures transparency going forward," she added. "Not just for me, but for anyone affected by your decisions." Calix rubbed his temples. "You're dismantling my autonomy." "You dismantled mine first," Arden replied evenly. "In systems where power has been centralized, audits restore balance by introducing independent review. They don't presume wrongdoing, they prevent it." Arden understood that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt through structure, not assurances. Calix closed the folder. "You're leaving me nowhere to hide." "That's intentional," Arden said. "No one should have to negotiate safety with secrecy." Judith's composure finally gave way. She stood, moving closer to Arden, her voice no longer controlled. "Please," she said. "I am asking you as a mother who is running out of time." Arden looked at her fully now. Not with anger, with attention. "I hear you," she said. Judith's hands trembled. "I raised him to survive," she continued. "I didn't raise him to do this." She swallowed. "If these terms are what it takes, then let the rest go. Spare him the rest." Calix turned sharply. "Mother, stop." "No," Judith said. "This is on me too." Arden felt the weight of the moment press in, but she didn't retreat. "I won't bargain with fear," she said gently. "And I won't erase consequences because time is short." Judith's eyes filled. "I am dying," she said plainly. "I know," Arden replied. "That's why this has to be clean." Clean meant honest. Clean meant final. Compassion without boundaries had brought them here. Arden understood now that mercy without accountability simply delays harm. "I'm not doing this to punish him," she added. "I'm doing this so nothing like this happens again." Judith lowered herself back into the chair, defeated but clear-eyed. In moments of crisis, urgency can pressure people into abandoning their standards. Arden refused. Ethical consent doesn't change because circumstances are painful. It becomes more important. Calix stood slowly, pacing once before stopping. The room had narrowed to the documents on the table and the choice they represented. "If I agree," he said, "I lose control." "You regain integrity," Arden replied. "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at Judith, then back at Arden. "You're cornering me." "No," she said calmly. "I'm giving you the option you denied everyone else." Silence followed. Not tension, finality. Calix understood it then. There was no path that restored his authority without acknowledging what he had done. "And if I don't sign?" he asked. Arden met his eyes. "Then I walk away." Judith closed her eyes. Dr. Okuri waited without pressure. The choice was clear, uncoerced, and documented, exactly how consent is meant to function. Calix reached for the pen, hesitated, then set it down again. "You'd really leave," he said. "Yes," Arden answered. "And I'd be at peace." He picked up the pen. Accountability works when consequences are real and proportional. When power shifts back to the person who was silenced, decisions regain ethical balance. Arden watched him sign, not with satisfaction, but with certainty that this agreement restored what had been taken, agency. If someone betrayed you like this, would you walk away, or make them face consequences? Calix sat back down, the pen untouched beside the folder. He opened it again, this time with care, as if the pages might react to haste. He read every line slowly. lips moving once before stilling. Arden watched him track the language he had underestimated. No shortcuts, no summaries, just consequences laid out in plain terms. "This clause," he said quietly, tapping the page. "It doesn't expire." "No," Arden replied. "It doesn't." He turned another page. The room stayed silent, except for the soft sound of paper. Judith's breathing was shallow. Dr. Okari remained still, present but uninvolved. This wasn't a medical decision anymore. It was reckoning. Calix paused again. "You planned this," he said. "I prepared," Arden corrected, "after learning what happens when I don't." He nodded once, as if that settled something internal. He kept reading. The pace slowed further, the weight of each sentence registering. Control had always come easily to him because information bent in his hands. Now it didn't. The words didn't respond to pressure or persuasion. Legal agreements exist to make outcomes predictable when trust fails. Arden understood that deeply now. Watching him read wasn't about satisfaction. It was about witnessing. The moment power leaves performance and enters structure, where intention no longer matters as much as accountability, Calix reached for the pen and stopped halfway. His fingers hovered, then closed around it, tighter than necessary. Arden noticed the change immediately, not panic, but strain. The kind that comes when control slips quietly out of reach. He adjusted his grip, then adjusted it again. "Take your time," Dr. Okari said, neutral. Calix nodded, though his eyes never left the page. His hand shook, not enough to draw attention, but enough that he noticed it himself. He steadied his wrist against the table, jaw tightening. "This isn't fear," he said, almost to himself. "It doesn't have to be," Arden replied. "It's recognition." He tried to smile and failed. The pen slipped slightly between his fingers. Judith looked away, pressing her lips together. Blair wasn't there to soften the moment. There was no one left to reassure him. Calix exhaled slowly. "I've signed contracts worth more than this," he said. "And none of them cost you control," Arden answered. He nodded again. The shaking returned as he moved the pen toward the first signature line. The body reacts when the mind accepts what pride resists. Stress doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it surfaces as a quiet tremor when certainty collapses. Arden remained still, unmoved not by cruelty, but by clarity. She wasn't taking anything from him. She was watching him give up what he had misused. In moments like this, accountability becomes physical. It settles into the hands, the breath, the space between decisions. And there was no undoing that now. Calix signed the first page and paused, as if expecting something to interrupt him. Nothing did. The pen scratched softly against paper. He turned the page with care, aligning the corners before reading the header again, even though it was the same as before. Arden noticed the ritual forming. Read, hesitate, sign. Control reasserted through repetition. "This one transfers voting rights," he said quietly. "Yes," Arden replied. "And this one authorizes disclosure." "Yes." Each confirmation landed like a step down a staircase he hadn't known existed. He signed again and again. Page by page, the structure he had built around himself loosened. There was no argument left to make. The documents didn't respond to persuasion. They only waited. Judith finally spoke. "Calix, stop if you need." "No," he said, sharper than intended. "I need to finish." His signature changed slightly with each page, the lines less confident, the pressure uneven. By the fourth page, his shoulders had slumped. Arden didn't look away. She understood the importance of witnessing. Agreements gain weight when the person harmed is present, not hidden behind intermediaries. Legal processes are designed to slow people down, to force acknowledgement of consequences in sequence rather than all at once. This wasn't humiliation. It was clarity unfolding in order. When Calix reached the final page, he rested the pen beside his name and sat back, exhausted. "I've never signed anything like this," he said. "Neither have I," Arden replied. "But I've lived the alternative." Calix pushed the folder forward as if it weighed more than paper. "It's done," he said. Arden didn't reach for it right away. She looked at him instead, noting the absence of defenses she had grown used to navigating. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pleading. He looked smaller, not diminished by loss, but by clarity. Dr. Okuri gathered the documents and checked each signature carefully. Judith sat motionless, hands folded, eyes unfocused. "You didn't even hesitate," Calix said to Arden. "I did," she replied. "Earlier, when hesitation still mattered." He nodded once, absorbing that. "You're not going to say anything?" "There's nothing left to explain," she said. Arden's calm wasn't indifference. It was completion. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it settles into stillness, into the refusal to relive what's already been resolved. She had given him terms. He had accepted them. That was the exchange. When control is reversed ethically, it doesn't require dominance. It requires boundaries that hold. Arden felt grounded by that truth. She wasn't reclaiming power by force. She had reclaimed it by refusing to surrender clarity again. Dr. Okuri stood. "We'll proceed according to these terms," he said. Arden nodded. The fall wasn't dramatic. It was final. And for the first time, nothing in that room depended on Calix's approval. Arden lay back as the nurses adjusted the rails, their movements practiced and calm. The operating table was firm beneath her, steady in a way that grounded her. Dr. Okuri stepped into view, eyes kind above his mask. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Clear," Arden replied after a moment. The answer surprised her with its honesty. He nodded. "We'll begin shortly. If anything feels wrong, you say so." "I will," she said. The room was quiet, not heavy, just focused. She watched gloved hands prepare instruments. Each step deliberate. No rush, no voices raised. This wasn't about urgency anymore. It was about care done properly. Medical procedures rely on trust built through transparency and consent. Arden felt that trust now, not because everything was easy, but because everything had been explained, chosen, and respected. She rested her hands at her sides, breathing evenly, aware of her body, and at peace with the decision she had made. Dr. Okuri leaned closer, voice steady and unhurried. "Arden, this is your last confirmation," he said. "You can still change your mind." She met his eyes. "I know." He reviewed her chart aloud, not for formality, but for assurance. Name, procedure, consent. Each item anchored the moment in choice, not expectation. "Any questions?" he asked. "No," Arden replied. "Everything I needed to ask was answered earlier." A nurse adjusted the blanket. "We'll take good care of you," she said quietly. "I believe you," Arden answered. The doctor nodded once, satisfied. "Then we'll proceed. Informed consent isn't a signature, it's an ongoing conversation." Arden understood that now. Being given space to decide, even at the final moment, mattered more than she had expected. It affirmed that her presence here wasn't owed. It was chosen. As the team prepared, Arden focused on her breathing, slow and even. There was no pressure left in the room, no one waiting to benefit from her silence. The decision stood on its own, complete and respected. As the room settled into readiness, Arden felt a quiet certainty move through her. Not relief, not triumph, just alignment. She wasn't here to prove loyalty or earn forgiveness. She was here because the choice still matched her values. She thought briefly of the past weeks, not with bitterness, but distance. The confusion, the withholding, the moment when truth finally replaced reassurance. None of it tugged at her now. Those decisions had already been answered. Dr. Okuri spoke again, more softly. "We'll start now." Arden nodded. "Okay." Her thoughts didn't race. They organized. She knew what she had agreed to and why. Clarity had replaced urgency, and that made all the difference. When decisions are made freely, fear loses its grip. Medical ethics protect not just bodies, but dignity. Arden felt that dignity intact. She had reclaimed it before entering this room. The procedure ahead was significant, but it didn't feel overwhelming. She had nothing left to negotiate with herself. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Arden felt her body grow heavy, but her mind stayed calm. There was no rush of second thoughts, no need to revisit what had already been settled. She had examined this choice from every angle and arrived here without pressure or persuasion. Dr. Okori's voice was the last she heard clearly. "We're with you," he said. "I know," Arden replied. There was comfort in that certainty, not because she depended on anyone else's approval, but because the process itself respected her. She wasn't afraid of what she was giving. She wasn't mourning what she might lose. The fear had belonged to an earlier version of herself, one who believed silence was the cost of care. Now, there was only stillness, no regret, no resentment, just the knowledge that she had acted with intention. When choices are made freely and with full understanding, peace follows naturally. The room faded, but her clarity didn't. It remained, steady and intact, carrying her into what came next without hesitation. The operating room was cooler than Arden expected, but not unwelcoming. She lay on the table while the team moved around her with quiet efficiency, each person focused, unhurried. Dr. Okori stood beside her, reviewing details one last time, his voice steady and familiar. "Arden Whitmore," he said, meeting her eyes. "We're proceeding with a donor nephrectomy. You've reviewed the risks, the recovery, and the long-term outlook. Do you still consent?" "Yes," Arden said. Not because she felt obligated, not because anyone was waiting on her answer. Because the decision was settled, owned, and unpressured. A nurse adjusted the line at her arm. "If you feel uncomfortable at any point before anesthesia, let us know." "I will," Arden replied. She stared at the ceiling, not searching for reassurance. Her thoughts were clear, orderly. This wasn't bravery, it was alignment. She had already done the hardest part days ago, choosing herself without abandoning compassion. Dr. Okori leaned closer. "This is your last chance to stop," he reminded her gently. "I know," she said again, and smiled faintly. "I'm ready." As preparations continued, Arden noticed something she hadn't expected, the absence of fear. She had imagined anxiety, doubt, second-guessing. Instead, there was stillness, the kind that comes when nothing inside you is arguing anymore. Medical consent, she had learned, wasn't just about saying yes. It was about understanding, autonomy, and timing. This yes wasn't extracted. It wasn't negotiated. It wasn't rushed. That mattered more than she could have explained. The anesthesiologist spoke softly. "You'll start to feel sleepy." "Okay." Her body relaxed as the medication began to work. The room didn't blur dramatically. It simply softened. The last thing she felt before drifting under was certainty, not about outcomes, but about integrity. No regret, no fear, no part of her wishing she had chosen differently. Judith woke up 3 days later. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of monitored breathing and the low hum of equipment. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to light that felt too steady to be imagined. Dr. Okori stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing a chart with deliberate calm. "The transplant was successful," he said. "Your body is responding well." Judith closed her eyes, breath unsteady as relief reached her chest. Survival carried its own weight. "And Arden?" she asked, voice thin but urgent. "She's stable," Dr. Okori replied. "Recovery is progressing as expected." She followed every post-operative instruction carefully. Judith nodded once. Gratitude rose, but it didn't come clean. It arrived tangled with memory, with recognition, with the cost of what had been allowed to happen. Relief didn't come alone. It arrived alongside reckoning. That afternoon, Calix's confession went live. There was no stage, no audience gathered in advance, no apology framed for sympathy. Just a written statement released through official channels, reviewed by independent counsel and the hospital's compliance team. It was factual, precise, unprotected by euphemism. He admitted to authorizing changes to medical records, to withholding information from multiple parties, to controlling timelines and communication in order to secure outcomes. No justification followed, no reference to intent. The statement didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't soften language. It didn't explain away harm. By nightfall, Consequences moved faster than he ever had. The board convened an emergency session, not a crisis meeting, a governance review. "You compromised ethical standards," the chair said flatly, eyes fixed on the document projected at the end of the table. "This isn't a public relations issue. It's a breach of trust." Another board member leaned forward. "You didn't just expose us legally, you undermined the foundation of decision-making itself." Calix sat silently. There was nothing to manage, nothing to redirect. Control depended on discretion, and discretion had already left the room. The vote was taken without delay. Unanimous removal. No raised voices, no speeches, just procedure doing what it was designed to do when authority fails its obligation. Investors didn't wait for explanations. Accounts were frozen pending review. Projects paused mid-cycle. Partnerships dissolved with emails that were brief, professional, and exact. Phrases repeated themselves across inboxes: risk exposure, loss of confidence, irreparable governance concerns. No one asked how he felt. Blair blocked his number that evening. She stared at the screen for a moment, the last unread message waiting behind a name she no longer recognized. Then she pressed the option without hesitation. She didn't cry. She didn't throw the phone aside. What she felt was quieter than grief, closer to relief. The illusion had cost her enough. By the next morning, his name was everywhere. Not sensationalized, not exaggerated, documented. Articles appeared across platforms that rarely aligned in tone. This time, they did. Facts were sufficient. The focus wasn't gossip. It wasn't personal drama. It was systemic failure enabled by concentrated control. Experts weighed in, not with outrage, but clarity. When one individual controls information, one analyst said, ethical safeguards collapse. Consent becomes performative. Oversight becomes symbolic. Another noted, this case highlights why transparency is not optional in medical and corporate decision-making. It protects everyone involved. The story wasn't about betrayal alone. It was about what happens when systems defer too easily to authority without verification. Calix watched it unfold from his apartment. The lights stayed off. The phone lay face down on the table. Notifications vibrated unanswered. Control had always been his shield. Without it, there was nothing to hide behind. Silence no longer worked as insulation. It only amplified absence. He tried to visit Arden 2 days later. The nurse at the desk checked the chart, then looked up. "She doesn't want to see you," she said calmly. There was no judgment in her voice, no edge, just a boundary delivered with care. That sentence landed harder than any headline. He stood there longer than necessary, then nodded once and turned away. The corridor felt longer than it had before, or perhaps he was simply walking it without the expectation that someone would make space for him. Judith requested a private meeting with hospital administration before discharge. "I allowed authority to replace accountability," she said quietly. "That ends with me." She funded an independent review of consent practices, not as penance, as correction. Arden recovered without spectacle. No interviews, no statements, no commentary. She focused on rest, mobility, and healing. The absence of noise felt intentional. Recovery, she learned, didn't need witnesses. Justice, she would later reflect, didn't arrive with cruelty. It arrived with proportion. No shouting, no revenge, no performance. Just accountability moving through systems that had finally been allowed to function as designed. And for the first time since the process began, no one asked her to be quiet to make it easier for someone else to remain comfortable. Arden wasn't looking for him. She had finished inside the courthouse earlier than expected, paperwork signed, dates confirmed, nothing left pending. The building emptied in slow waves as people filtered. Out, conversations hushed, footsteps measured. She stepped into the afternoon air and paused, letting her body settle before moving on. That was when she saw him. Calix stood near the steps, not pacing, not waiting for anyone in particular, just standing. His suit no longer fit the way it once had. The confidence that used to hold his shoulders back had softened into something looser, less certain. When he noticed her, his expression shifted. Not surprise, but recognition. They regarded each other in silence. "You look well," he said finally. "I am," Arden replied. She didn't offer more. She didn't need to. He nodded, eyes flicking away for a moment before returning. "Recovery going okay?" "Yes." Another pause. He glanced toward the courthouse doors, then back at her. "My mother asked me to tell you she's grateful." "I know," Arden said. "She already did." That seemed to disarm him more than anger would have. He exhaled slowly. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." "I didn't plan to," she said, honestly. "This wasn't intentional." He managed a faint smile. "Nothing about this ever is." They stood there, the space between them neither tense nor familiar, just clear. "They've finalized everything," he said. "The audits, the transfers. I'm aware. You didn't have to do all of that," he added. "I did," Arden replied, "because I needed it to be finished. Completely." He nodded again, slower this time. "I didn't think you'd follow through." She met his eyes. That was part of the problem. The truth settled between them without friction. Then he asked the question that had clearly been waiting. Was it worth it? Arden didn't answer right away. She considered the version of herself who might have rushed to reassure him, who might have softened the moment to make it easier. That person felt distant now. "I saved a life," she said at last, "and I stopped lying to myself." His jaw tightened. "You destroyed mine." "No," she said gently. "You destroyed yours. I just stopped carrying it for you." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. He absorbed them slowly, like something he had suspected but never allowed himself to name. "I thought I was protecting everyone," he said. "You were protecting outcomes," Arden replied, "not people." He looked at her then, not searching for forgiveness but understanding. "I don't know how I missed that." "You didn't miss it," she said. "You chose not to see it." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, not unfinished, just honest. "I won't ask you to forgive me," he said. "That's good," Arden replied, "because forgiveness isn't something you request, it's something someone arrives at on their own." He nodded, accepting that. "I hope you're happy," he said. "I am," she answered, and for the first time, the word didn't feel like a defense. They stood there another moment, two people no longer bound by expectation or obligation. "Take care," he said finally. "You too," Arden replied. She turned and walked away, her steps steady, unhurried. She didn't look back, not because she was avoiding anything, but because there was nothing left behind that required her attention. Closure, she had learned, isn't about winning. It's about clarity. It's about leaving without carrying what was never yours to hold. And for the first time in a long time, Arden felt exactly that, unburdened, intact, and free.